When he was 12, Holly's mother had taught him how to handle a gun. His biggest problem was holding still. He kept falling outside his marks. "Take a breath," she told him. "Take a breath and let half of it out." She'd said it so often that he nearly always breathed this way, even when he didn't have a gun in his hands. He took in what he could, and he held half of it back. And that's how he kept himself steady, day to day, year to year, every time he squeezed the trigger. Now, usually Holly only drank whiskey or beer. In his mind, vodka was the drink alcoholics drank because you couldn't smell it on them. It was what his mother used to drink. He remembered the bottles. He'd even saved one for a while after she left, until his father found it and threw it out. This vodka the girl had brought was cheap stuff, and it burned Holly's throat on the way down. The girl squeaked hers fast and poured another. "What's your name?" Holly asked. "Amy," she said. "That's a pretty name," he said. She looked at him strangely with her black eye until Holly felt uncomfortable. He didn't want her to think he was hitting on her, so he moved further away, towards the door, and leaned against the wall there. She was still sitting on the bed. The baby had fallen asleep beside her, his face to the side, and his arms over his head like he was in a hold-up. "Did those hurt?" Holly asked, pointing at her ears. Her fingers floated to the hoops, caressed the purple feather. "The ones up top did," she said, "but now I don't even think about it. I get a piercing whenever something important happens, something I want to remember." Amy poured a second drink for herself. She threw it back like a shot and sighed. "Is that the right time?" The clock on the bedside table said 4:16 a.m., the same time it had read when Holly arrived. It could have been 2 or even 5. There was no way to know because the sandstorm outside had turned the sky so dark and yellow. Holly took another sip of vodka. "Probably not." "I'm so tired," Amy said. She closed her eyes and rubbed them. "I'll go see if the manager's back," said Holly. He put his drink on the table, unlocked the door, and stepped onto the landing. The wind was still fierce. He jogged down the stairs and around the building, thinking about the holes in Amy's ears. He wondered if she'd ever want to forget the things that had happened to her, remove the hoops, and let the skin close back over itself. He tried the motel doors again. They were still locked. He beat on the window, but nobody came. He checked for cars. There were 2 parked in front, a pickup with an Arizona license plate and a brown van from Kansas, but they were both empty. He walked around the corner. His Ford was still where he'd left it. A few spots down, there was a blue hatchback with a big dent in the passenger side. Through the window, he could see piles of clothes and a few taped-up boxes and a baby seat in the back. He stood in the parking lot and looked up at his room. All the other windows in the motel were dark. Amy was stretched out next to the baby on the bed when he opened the door. He could tell from the way her shoulders moved that she was asleep. He closed the door gently, and then he went into the bathroom and checked the toilet. The licorice jar was still there. He threw some water on his face, and then he came out and pushed the bag of guns deeper into the closet. He walked to the other side of the bed and took the Beretta from the back of his pants and put it in the drawer of the table next to the Bible. Then he slipped off his shoes and sat down on the bed. The smell of cigarettes still hovered in the corners of the motel room, but all the bed smelled of now was baby powder and apples. Holly leaned back against the headboard. He could barely keep his eyes open, but he didn't feel right lying down with them. The baby made little sighing noises and sucked on air, its mouth moving like it was going at a bottle. The bruised side of Amy's face was against the bedspread, and without the black eye showing, she looked even younger. She'd taken her hair out of the bun, and it was spread across the pillow. Holly listened to the girl and the baby breathing. Then he reached over and turned out the light. When he woke up, it was still dark, and Amy was kissing him. Holly didn't know where he was at first, and then he saw her face leaning over him in the red of the motel clock. The number still read 4:16. She was soft and warm pressed up against him. Holly was afraid that touching her would end it, so he kept still. She was kissing him slowly and carefully, and when he couldn't help himself anymore, his hands went to her waist and she moved away. Then after a minute she slid forward again and kept her mouth just out of reach, hovering over his, their faces close and their breath going into each other. Her hair fell down and brushed his lips, and there were the apples. The smell was coming from her hair. He wound his fingers through to her scalp and pulled. His knuckles brushed the line of hoops in her ear, all that cold metal going through her skin. She tugged at his shirt, and he threw it off, and she ran her teeth along his shoulder. And then they got hold of each other's belts and tried to unlatch them in the dark. She got his done first and threw it to the ground, then pushed his fumbling fingers away and stood up next to the bed and slid her jeans down each of her long legs and stepped out of them, her bare skin glowing in the clock light. Holly caught her around the hips and buried his face in her neck, and together they fell onto the carpet. He pushed her knees open, and she made a sound like it was hurting her. Holly tried to see her face, but she only wrapped herself tighter around him, and their bodies spun, and he cracked his head on the frame of the bed. And that's when he heard the gunshots. 2 quick pops in a row, and then silence. The girl was still panting and shaking beneath him. Holly covered her mouth with his hand. They waited like that in the dark on the floor of the motel room. And then there was another blast, and the baby woke up and started crying. Holly scrambled to the table and pulled open the drawer and took out the Beretta. He went to the window and pushed back the curtain. He couldn't see anything but the 2 cars. He turned around, and Amy was still lying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. "Shut him up," Holly said. The girl got to her knees and then climbed onto the bed. She pulled the baby to her chest and started rocking. Holly found his jeans in the dark and then went to the closet. He grabbed some clips and his father's rifle, too, and then he went back to the window. The baby was still crying. Every scream screwed Holly's nerves tighter. The girl was searching through her bag. She found a bottle, but her hands were shaking, and she dropped it twice, and then she got back on the bed and stuffed the nipple into the baby's mouth, and the baby was quiet. Holly took a deep breath. He told the girl to keep the light off. Then he told her to take the baby and go into the bathroom and lock the door. She cleared her throat a few times like she was going to say something, but then she didn't. He listened to her gather the kid and her clothes, and then he heard the door to the bathroom click. His eyes never left the parking lot. The sky was paling, just a few stars left. He could still sense the clock behind him, the stagnant numbers like heat, illuminating the side of his face in the gloom. A few minutes later, the brown van, the one from Kansas, eased around the side of the building. It circled through the lot and slowed by Holly's car, then stopped right before it came to Amy's. A man got out on the driver's side holding a handgun. It was the man with the freckles. He was wearing the red bowling shirt the Navajo had on earlier. His arms were bare and his prison tattoos wound up past his elbows. He checked the license on Holly's truck and peered in the windows of Amy's hatchback. Then he looked up at the line of rooms. Holly could tell the man was working the odds. They'd both seen him, Holly and the girl. If he'd only stolen some money, he might get in his car and leave. But if he'd killed the Navajos, he'd probably come after them. The man reached back into the van. He took out a box of bullets, opened the chamber on his revolver, and reloaded. Then he wiped his hands on the red bowling shirt and started up the stairs. Holly knew how to read the weather, to compensate for drag while taking his shot. If leaves changed direction, the wind was close to 7 miles per hour. If branches began to bend, it was closer to 9. But there were no trees here to tell how fast the storm was blowing, not even a plastic bag caught in a fence. Only the sand that was circling the asphalt below, crossing the desert and pelting the windows with dust. The man with the freckles climbed onto the landing, then turned and made his way along the row of doors. He took out a set of master keys and fit one into the lock of Amy's room. He slipped inside. As soon as he did, Holly stepped out onto the landing. He leveled the rifle, but the wind swept up and started pushing against him. The barrel would not hold still. "Start with your feet," his mother told him. Your heels are already on the ground. Build from there when you lose your way. Holly eased his weight back. He shook the tension from his calves and loosened his knees. He turned at the waist. He pressed one elbow to his hip and the other high against his ribs. And then he laid his cheek gently to the stock of the barrel and dragged it down behind the rear sight. Holly took in a full breath. He let half of it out. The man with the freckles stepped from Amy's room, not even careful, the red shirt like a target. Holly could have shot him in the head, but he went for the shoulder. The man cried out and staggered and then lurched for the stairs, but before he made it down, he turned and fired off all the rounds he'd been holding. Holly stepped back too slow and felt a burn through his right side, and suddenly his arm couldn't support the rifle anymore. It was falling, and it fell, and he watched it fall, and then he was scrambling for the Beretta. He staggered over to the edge of the balustrade with the handgun. There was blood, it was streaming out over the walkway, and his head was spinning. He looked from the pool of red to the man struggling into the van below, the bowling shirt catching air and fluttering sideways, clocking the speed of the wind. 30 miles per hour, Holly decided. Then he raised the gun and took the shot. When Holly tried to stand, his lungs weren't working. It was like there was a sponge at the back of his throat. He crawled across the landing on his knees. The concrete was cold and hard and unforgiving. He called Amy's name and pushed open the door. When she came out of the bathroom, she was fully dressed, like when he first met her, her hair pulled back tight in a bun once more and the baby in the sling and zipped up in her jacket. The only thing different was her face, pale and white and thin. We got to leave, he managed, but he couldn't get up from the floor. Amy took all the towels from the bathroom and wet them and pressed them to his side. Then she grabbed some diapers and opened them and put them underneath, taping the plastic tabs to his skin. Holly told her to get the bag with the guns and to fetch the rifle he dropped, and then he told her to open the toilet and get the jar of licorice out of the tank and put it in the bag too. She did all he asked, and when she came back and kneeled beside him, her face held the same strange look from earlier when he told her that her name was pretty. He barely remembered coming down the stairs. Amy maneuvered him into the back of her car, and then she put the bag in the trunk, and then she opened the other door and took the baby out of the sling and strapped him into the plastic seat next to Holly. The van was still running, the man with the freckles half in, half out of the driver's seat. Clots of hair and shattered bone littered the pavement, and the windshield was sprayed with blood. Amy got to the front of the hatchback and slammed the door. She gripped the steering wheel and kept her eyes on the rearview mirror. "You think the manager's dead?" "We should check," said Holly. They drove around the front of the building. Amy got out, and this time the motel doors were unlocked. Holly and the baby stayed in the car, the kid watching the spot his mother had disappeared into, kicking his tiny feet and drooling. Holly pressed the diapers against his ribs and drifted in and out. When Amy came back, she froze for a moment, holding onto the handle of the car, looking like she was going to be sick, and Holly knew that he'd been right and the other men were dead, and he wished he'd listened to his guts when he checked in and saw those freckles. He could have been miles away by now, or even drinking beers with McGee and not dying in the back of some girl's car. Amy fumbled with her seatbelt. Then she put the car in reverse and backed out of the parking lot. "There's a doctor on the reservation," she said, "about 10 miles down." The seat cushion beneath Holly was wet with blood. There was blood on the seat belts, blood on the floor. "Who reported?" "Not if you pay him," Amy said. And that's when Holly knew she'd gone into the jar. He tried to say something about this, but it came out slurred. He focused on the little boy strapped in the carrier next to him and tried to stay awake. The elephant pajamas had blood on them, and the baby was staring at the back of Amy's head, and his arms were grabbing for his mother like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. The sun seemed to be coming up. The sky a multitude of pinks and oranges, and Holly wondered what time it was. The bullet was turning now, spinning its hardness into a dark place and taking him with it. He touched the diapers taped along the side of his stomach. They smelled of talcum powder and were heavy and warm and felt alive in his hands, just like the baby's diaper had when he'd carried it into the bathroom and put it in the trash. "We're nearly there," Amy said. And she said, "I'll go back and get your car for you." Holly hoped she would. He hoped that when he woke up and stumbled out of the doctor's house into the blazing desert that she'd be there, with the baby and the money And it wouldn't just be his car dusted on the side of the road with the keys in the ignition and a pile of bloody towels, that he wouldn't have to check the trunk to see if she'd left the guns, and that there'd be at least $1,000 left for him in the licorice jar. She owed him that, at least, he thought. She owed him something. So now to the main event, which I'm very excited about. It's so awesome every time Patrick Somerville comes to New York. It just makes me a little bit happier knowing that he's here. And as I have sort of like struggled over the years, and I'm a really, really slow, exhaustive writer, and I often sort of just get distracted and bored with writing. It can get really boring sometimes. Patrick has just put me to shame. And has just written some amazing books, one after the other. His first was Trouble, a great collection of stories, which includes a story that he wrote for one story called Trouble and the Shadowy Deathblow. Also The Cradle, which was shortlisted for the Center for Fiction Prize. The Universe in Miniature, and now This Bright River, which you are all going to purchase tonight. So I thought it'd be fun to read recently recommended reading, which is a great new thing being done by Electric Literature. It's basically shorts that are given out digitally and for free, is asking different editors and writers to recommend their favorite short stories, and I picked Patrick's story, Trouble and the Shadowy Deathblow. So here's my introduction that I wrote for that short story. Here are some reasons why you should read Trouble and the Shadowy Deathblow. Number 1, spray on cheese. Before this story was pulled from our slush pile, I had never given much thought to the science of processed food. But after reading Patrick Somerville's hilarious first sentence and meeting artificial dairy man, Jim Funkle, I knew that I had to publish Trouble in the Shadowy Deathblow. It appeared in one story in October 2003. He had me at spray on cheese. 2, Star Trek. When I asked Patrick Somerville where the idea of this story came from, here's what he said. Well, I was living in San Francisco, and somebody on the BART sneezed on me. And I was incredibly angry about it. And then I went home and watched Star Trek. Worf was dealing with his son's reluctance to enter into his rite of passage training. And he demonstrated some kind of ancient Klingon martial arts maneuver that I immediately imagined myself using on the sneezing man. Then I ate some Doritos. 3, the Deathblow. Sometimes I think about my life in 2 phases. Before I knew about the Shadowy Deathblow, and after I knew about the Shadowy Deathblow. I do not want to give away too much of this ingenious creation, but there is a spectacularly surprising sentence halfway through this story that involves the Deathblow and a certain appendage of Jim Funkle. I still think about that sentence whenever I believe I have written something smart and humorous. Is it as funny as that? I ask myself. Usually the answer is no. 4, Patrick Somerville. Trouble and the Shadowy Deathblow was Patrick Somerville's first publication. I still find this hard to believe because the story is so good. In the 9 years since we ran it in one story, Patrick has become a literary rock star, publishing 4 books, including the just released This Bright River. In its brief life, this book has already received rave reviews and been part of a literary dust-up, which somehow resulted in a real-life friendship between the novel's fictional main character and an editor from the New York Times. Only in the world of Patrick Somerville could something like this happen. 5, Joy. One story has published over 170 different authors. At this point, I am the only one who remembers them all. I've developed a knack for summarizing each story into a single sentence. Here is my sentence for Trouble and the Shadowy Deathblow. It's about a guy who makes processed cheese and accidentally becomes a killing machine. Even though this sounds super awesome all on its own, this story is so much more. It's about jealousy and fatherhood and marriage and self-worth. It's about rage and mystery and ambition and secrets and crazy strangers who send their birds to peck out your eyes in the dark alleyways of San Francisco. It is written with great skill, humor, and heart. But most important, there is joy on every page. You can tell Patrick Somerville had fun writing this story, and I promise you will have fun reading it too. So help me welcome Patrick Somerville.
Thanks for coming too. You all do know that feeling when someone gives you a cold, right? When you hate them, and it's not even kind of like you're not even really understanding what they've done. You hate them for what they did to you. That was really the source of all the emotion that's in that story. So it was a hatred, pure hatred. I'm really happy to be here back at the Center for Fiction and to be reading with Hannah too, who was the first person who published anything that I had ever written, and it was 10 years ago, which seems impossible as well. And somehow we've never read together, I don't think.
Really? No.
We haven't, so it's great to be here. And I have a story about the one story two, but maybe I'll tell it when we sit down. For now, I'm just going to read, since I was at O'Hare this morning, I'm just going to read the very beginning of this book, and then tell you a couple things about it, and then read a bit more further in the book. Hannah just read a sex scene combined with action sequence plus recovery and getaway and fine meditations on the winds and aim and money. I'm going to read about people thinking and talking to each other. So take that for what it is. I don't know what to say about that, but that was a great reading too. What is that book called?
I don't have the title yet. I've got one more to come up with the title.
Okay. Maybe the audience can help with that title later. So I'll just read the very beginning of this book and then tell you a few things and then read a little bit more. This is the opening chapter. The chapter is called Regarding the Unreliable Jesuit Explorer Pierre Betancourt. Sleep on the plain. Dream of the ancient ocean I am leaving, and a farewell glance at the tops of mountains I have not climbed. O'Hare then, changed in an unsayable way, but changed alongside the grays and whites and moving walkways, people drifting with their rolling bags, the smell of the Cinnabon, and the wedge-shaped line at the corner McDonald's. A disembodied voice compels the sea of walkers to part from behind. We watch as his beeping white cart crawls through the gap we've created, and he nods his chill thanks, chewing his gum and wearing his three-piece United Airlines suit like a tuxedo. An elderly couple is aboard his vessel, seated on the back puff seats facing stern, facing us, eyes sleepy as heads rock left, right, absorbing buffets. They get to ride because they are so old. Bubblers. Children run the wrong way on the moving walkway and therefore have no motion. A girl is asleep with her back against a white pillar in an empty gate, and she's in her pajamas as though she knew that it would come to this. Planes like toys I used to fly with arm power, drifting down the land, parking on the tarmac. I see them through the windows. Shoeshine guys have a station against the wall, and then the Quiznos, and I know that I am closer. Anyone who's been to O'Hare may know that Quiznos. Every time I see it, some marker of something good or bad, I don't know, return. But this book is a combination of a few different kinds of stories that I had wanted to tell for a long time. The first being the story of coming home. And I just always love those stories. I love those movies, I love those books. Just coming back to the place where you grew up and being different and sort of reflecting on how the place has changed and how you have changed and how the two things interact. I love those stories, and I decided I was going to make one too. But alongside that, I'm also fascinated by the idea of small towns and big cities, and people who come from either or, and people who experience either or, and how they sort of relate to such things. I came from a middle-sized town in Green Bay, Wisconsin. It was 100,000 people, and I slowly went up and up. I then went to Madison, and then I went to New York and San Francisco, and then now I live in Chicago. But I think that people from the Midwest in particular are sort of confused about their Midwestern identity, whether or not they should retain them for authenticity's sake when they come to New York, or completely shed themselves of their Midwest and go full New York. Or maybe they shed it and then they go home, and then they're New York when they're home, but they're Midwest when they're in New York. I don't know. I mean, I like all that stuff, and I like the myths and the things that people use to create their own identities with those stories. So I'm just going to jump ahead. The book is about that. What I just read is our main character, Ben, is coming home, and he has pretty much screwed up his life in his 20s, and it's his early 30s. He's come back to try to get his feet under him again after a totally unsuccessful stint on the West Coast, involving drug use, involving blowing a trust fund, involving ending up in jail for a little while. My first book, The Cradle, my first novel, The Cradle, was about someone with an awful history who somehow managed to make a good life for himself, which was fascinating to me, how you can overcome history. And I decided I wanted to also write a book about a kind of person who I knew much better, which was someone with a privileged history who somehow managed to totally screw up their lives. And I feel like I know so many people who had everything they needed to have a good life, and it's inexplicable. In a strange way, the other is inexplicable too, the bad history somehow being okay, but this, something, I don't know, I don't understand it. I wanted to explore it more. So Ben is that kind. He had a good life, he had a good family, and he screwed it all up, and sort of resetting as he comes home. So he's been back home, he's house sitting, he's been here for a couple months, he's settling in, he's feeling a little better, and his family comes back to see how he's doing. They've since left and gone to Chicago. So this is the first scene they're all together. He's here, he's kind of comfortable here, his mom and dad are here, and his sister has flown in as well, and they're all talking about small towns and big towns. My mother, father, sister, and I all sat around the circular table on Denny's porch, eating chips and brats and listening to the Allman Brothers. Haley had demanded a CSNY break. Ben is obsessed with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, sometimes Young too, on Denny's yellow outdoor boombox. I can tell there's something to tell, said my mother, smiling. Even I can tell. Ben has recently reconnected with a young lady who he fancies. She looked good, and she was more relaxed here than I had seen her in a long time. Haley's blonde hair had come from my father. My mother had a darker complexion that came from her grandmother's Italian side. She sat back in her chair with a smile on her face, her glasses hanging from around her neck by a thin chain. For a long time she dyed her hair, the same near black it had always been, but she let it go now, and had let the streaks of gray come. There is a young lady in town who I have talked to, I said. There is no more information for you. I looked at my father. You get no names. Something tells me that we might be able to figure it out, Ben, said my dad. St. Helens isn't that big. My father was in a good mood. I expected he'd be cranky while he was here and mad at me for not yet going up to the cabin. He also just tended to get discombobulated when he was out in the world away from Chicago, especially during those times when my mother wasn't there acting as his corrective. She'd been on the fence about coming because what had happened to Denny here, but she powered through. I could only imagine what this visit would have been like without her. She tempered him, and together they formed a kind of Voltron of suitable social interaction. My father taking pleasure in providing definitive statements and passing judgment on all manners of the world, about which he knew quite a lot, I admit. My mother supplying more nuance and good cheer and doing the work of cleaning up whatever bad things had happened around the dinner table with their friends. I don't mean to suggest that taken separately they weren't fully formed people, both with their own intricate moods, both very good in their ways at steering themselves through the problems of the day-to-day world. What I mean is they had chosen this default tag team way of being as a supplement to who they were as individuals. And what did I know? Maybe that's just what happens when you're married 35 years. Okay, Haley said. He's getting pissed. We'll leave you alone. I'm not pissed, I said. I'm discreet. As always, said my father, and I could not decode what ironic meaning was underneath his words. My mother asked what it was like being back in St. Helens. It's nice, actually, I said. Nicer than I thought it would be. What did you think it would be? I thought it would be a combination of macabre because of Wayne and Denny, and then totally alien. Alien, said my father. How could it be alien? You grew up here. Well, it was alien then, Dad, said Haley. But I've always thought of St. Helens as fundamentally normal, said my father, not turning to look at Haley after this comment. Sure, you'll get your neurotic people wherever you go, but at least here there's a good straightforwardness to the way life works. Oh, please, Jack, said my mother. You've romanticized it beyond all recognition. I've done no such thing, he said. I could list a dozen examples of people here or things that have happened here that completely undermine whatever sentimental notions you have about St. Helens, my mother said. Once and for all, it's darker and stranger in small towns than almost anywhere else. All right, said my father. Let's have them. What? Give me your dozen examples. Are you truly serious? Do bears bear? He said. Do bees bee? Oh, that expression, said my mother. Don't get distracted, sweetheart, he said. The job falls to you, but I'll let you off the hook. Name 10, and we'll call it even. Fine, she said, leaning forward, resting both palms flat on the table. 10. All four of us looked at her fingers, splayed out as markers. Maybe we can start with the sadomasochism murder by the renters on McCullough Street, she said, in 1984. She looked at my father. You remember, don't you, Jack? The people with the plastic bags over their heads. That is a solid start, I said. And since we started on murder, let me fill examples 2, 3, 4, and 5 with various homicides that come to mind. Off the top of my head, the hit and run in the Farm and Fleet parking lot, the awful holdup at the Burger King, which we could count as rape too, but we won't. The man who killed his boss at the fish store, Jenny Monroe. My father looked at her fingers, then slowly leaned back in his chair and took a drink from his beer. You can't do all murders, he said. It's not fair. Well, how about just plain bizarre, said my mother. How about the woman they found living in the basement of the elementary school? That was bizarre, yes, said my father, who had now realized he was going to lose badly. She was down there eating birdseed for 6 months, wasn't she? I have no idea what. Which reminds me, of course, of the Burlington Coat Factory that was using dog pelts to make their coats, but I'm not allowed to use it because that was Black Earth, wasn't it? It's just an aside. We won't count that one. Well, said Haley, that is totally disgusting. That was a complicated story involving fur contamination overseas, said my father. That is not fair. It had nothing to do with Black Earth. How about when people realized after 10 years that the bus driver at St. John's was a pedophile? And what about the airplane that crashed into the farm off 32? Where am I, Benjamin? 8, I said. You can stop now, said my father. 9 can be when John Bueller burned down the Glickman's house after he and Bill Glickman swapped wives. Halloween, 1973. All right, said my father. And 10, my mother said, looking up at the house. 10 can be Wayne. What about Wayne? She shrugged. Everything about Wayne. It's amazing how skilled you are, sweetheart, at turning a game into a bath of raw sewage. He looked at me. Don't you think she should have counted herself on that list, Ben? Huh? I just stared straight ahead, as did my sister. You told me I only had to get to 10, said my mom, apparently unmoved by what my father had said. But if I were to keep going, she said, I just would have counted your parents. My father burst out laughing, and eventually my mother giggled, pleased with herself for her joke. I thought it would be appropriate right then for an ominous clap of thunder to roll down out of the sky, damning us all to hell. My sister started eating her pickle. I withdraw my pastoral fantasy, said my father, who stood and went to the cooler for another beer. Okay, dear, you win. Thanks.